Su-won wakes up to the rattling of a wooden carriage and a massive headache, only to realize she has transmigrated into the body of the capital's most notoriously cruel noblewoman. Her punishment? Permanent banishment to the freezing, desolate northern frontier of the empire. Stripped of her wealth and silk robes, Su-won refuses to succumb to the harsh environment. Discovering that the local villages produce an abundance of coarse, unrefined sheep's wool, she carves a hook out of bamboo and gets to work. She launches a handmade crochet enterprise, introducing revolutionary, comfortable designs to the medieval market, starting with silk-lined wool scrunchies to protect the villagers' hair, and expanding into stylish bucket hats to survive the brutal winters. Her obsessive dedication to achieving a seamless join elevates her goods from simple peasant crafts to highly sought-after boutique quality. Her booming supply chain soon catches the attention of General Huo Ting, the terrifying, stoic commander of the Northern Vanguard. What begins as a strict merchant contract to supply the army with winter gear quickly unravels into a wildly profitable, slow-burn romance, when the general realizes he wants to monopolize far more than just her inventory. They say love is unpredictable, and today's story proves it. Welcome to Romancecravestories, where every episode is full of passion, secrets, and emotional twists. Let's begin. The first thing I realized when I woke up was that my head was pounding to the rhythm of wooden wheels on frozen dirt. The second thing was that the heating in my apartment was definitely broken. I opened my eyes, expecting to see my familiar ceiling and the massive stash of merino wool I had left on my nightstand. Instead, I was staring at the woven bamboo roof of an archaic carriage. I tried to sit up, my joints aching as freezing wind bit through the thin, embroidered silk robes I was wearing. "My lady, you are awake." A young girl with twin buns and a tear-streaked face threw herself at my knees, sobbing loudly. "Please do not despair. Even though the emperor has banished us to the northern frontier, Xiaotsue will serve you until death. Please do not try to throw yourself into the frozen river again." Banished. Emperor. Northern frontier. A flood of memories that definitely didn't belong to me rushed into my brain. I groaned, holding my temples. I hadn't just woken up in a weird carriage, I had transmigrated. I was now Su-won, the famously wicked, deeply unpopular eldest daughter of the prime minister, who had finally pushed the imperial court too far and been exiled to Heiha, a border town so far north that the main export was ice and misery. The carriage lurched to a halt. The driver unceremoniously dumped my single wooden trunk onto the snow-packed ground and rode off without a word. I stepped out of the carriage, my silk slippers sinking into 3 inches of snow. Before me stood my new home. A dilapidated, drafty courtyard with half a roof and a single, pathetic plum blossom tree practically shivering in the wind. Xiaotsue wept harder, mourning our lost luxury. I, however, was running a different calculation. I was a modern woman who had built a 6-figure online crochet business out of my living room. I didn't care about court politics or lost status. I cared about the fact that my fingers were currently turning blue. "Xiaotsue," I chattered, pulling my last remaining silver hairpin from my elaborate, heavy hairdo. "Stop crying. Take this to the market. I don't care what the exchange rate is. Buy a brazier, some coal, and the biggest sack of raw, spun sheep's wool you can find." Xiaotsue blinked through her tears, thoroughly confused. "Wool, my lady? But that is coarse peasant material. It will ruin your delicate skin." "If I don't get warm by tonight, my delicate skin is going to get frostbite," I ordered, pushing the silver pin into her hands. "Go." As she scrambled off toward the town square, I dragged my frozen limbs into the main hall of the ruined manor. There was a broken bamboo chair in the corner. I picked up a shattered leg, pulled a small, rusted carving knife from the kitchen, and sat down on the dusty floor. I didn't have my ergonomic aluminum hooks. I didn't have my premium yarn. But I had survival instincts and muscle memory. By the time Xiaotsue returned with a massive, heavy sack of unrefined local yarn, I had whittled the bamboo splinter into a perfectly smooth, perfectly angled 6mm crochet hook. I brushed the wood shavings off my silk dress, grabbed the end of the scratchy wool, and tied a slip knot. The capital thought they had sent me here to die. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. Chapter 1. The rhythmic snag, pull, loop of my makeshift bamboo hook was the only sound in the freezing courtyard, save for the howling wind rattling the paper windows. My fingers were stiff, and the unrefined sheep's wool Xiaotsue had bought was abrasive enough to scrub a walk, but I didn't stop. Muscle memory took over. I chained 30, joined the ring, and began working continuous rounds of half-double crochets. It wasn't elegant work. The tension was tight, born from sheer shivering desperation. And the bamboo hook lacked the smooth glide of modern aluminum. By the time the charcoal brazier had burned down to embers, I had produced a thick, tubular cowl. I pulled it over my head, burying my freezing nose into the dense stitches. It was itchy. It was the color of dirty snow. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever made, because it was actively preventing my death by hypothermia. "My lady," Xiaotsue whispered the next morning, walking into the main hall with a bowl of thin rice porridge. She stared at the thick woolen tube engulfing my neck. What manner of garment is that?" "It's a cowl," I said, my voice muffled by the wool. I had already started on a second one for her. "It traps the body heat. Come here." I pulled the second cowl over her twin buns. Xiaotsue gasped, her hands flying up to touch the thick, ribbed fabric. The instant warmth was undeniable, but as she pulled it down around her neck, a loud snap echoed in the quiet room. Xiaotsue winced, untying one of her buns. The coarse, stiff hemp cord she used to tie her hair had caught on the wool, snapping a large chunk of her hair right at the root. "The winter air makes it so brittle," Xiaotsue mourned, trying to smooth down the broken strands. And the hemp ties saw right through it. "The women in the village say by the time spring arrives, we all look like molting birds." I stared at the broken hemp cord in her hand. Then, I looked down at the ruined hem of the incredibly expensive, utterly useless capital silk dress I was wearing. The entrepreneurial gears in my brain, frozen since my banishment, suddenly began to grind into motion. Hair breakage. Harsh winds. A market of women desperate for a protective, functional solution. "Xiaotsue," I said, setting my bowl of porridge down. "Go into my trunk. Fetch the green brocade robe, the pink silk inner garment, and my sewing shears." "My lady, those are your last fineries from the capital." "They are inventory," I corrected, grabbing my bamboo hook. "Bring them here." For the next 3 days I didn't sleep. The capital silk was smooth and frictionless, perfect for protecting hair. But silk on its own lacked elasticity. It couldn't hold a hairstyle in the gale force winds of the northern frontier. The local wool, however, had incredible tensile strength and memory when crocheted into tight, ribbed stitches using the back loop only technique. I needed to combine them. I crocheted a thick, highly elastic internal band out of the wool. Then, using careful, tiny stitches, I encased the wool entirely in a ruched tube of the smooth capital silk. The wool provided the stretch and hold, while the silk protected the hair shaft. I had just invented the medieval scrunchie. "Put it in," I ordered, tossing a shimmering emerald green scrunchie to Xiaotsue. She gathered her hair into a single high ponytail, wrapping the silk-covered band around twice. It held perfectly, the deep green silk looking like a blossoming flower against her dark hair. She shook her head. The ponytail didn't budge, and more importantly, it didn't pull or snap. "It's so soft," she marveled, touching the ruched fabric. "It feels like a cloud." "It's a premium hair care accessory," I said, surveying the 50 other colorful scrunchies I had piled onto the wooden table. "Pack them up. We are going to the market." The Heihe Central Market was a chaotic, freezing sprawl of vendors shouting over the wind, selling salted fish, root vegetables, and coarse furs. When Xiaotsue and I laid out our small cloth on an empty wooden crate, the vibrant pinks, greens, and golds of our silk scrunchies practically glowed against the dreary gray backdrop of the town. At first, the village women just stared. Lady Su Wan, the famously wicked exile, was sitting in the snow selling hair ties. "What are those?" a baker's wife finally asked, wiping flour from her hands as she eyed the bright pink scrunchie. "They look like capital finery. We don't have tails of silver for such things." "You don't need silver," I said smoothly, falling right back into my old sales pitch. I picked up the scrunchie, stretching it wide to demonstrate the elasticity before letting it snap back into its perfect, ruffled shape. "This is a cold weather hair protector. The internal structure holds your hair firm against the northern winds, while the silk exterior guarantees you won't lose a single strand to breakage. You'll never need to buy harsh hemp cords again." I paused, looking at her frayed hair. 2 copper coins. It was a steal for capital silk, but a fortune for a hair tie. The baker's wife hesitated, then slapped 2 copper coins onto my crate. She tied her hair back. The immediate relief from the pulling hemp was visible on her face. Word spread like wildfire. A solution to the winter hair breakage, made from real capital silk, for only 2 coppers? In less than an hour, the crate was empty. My fingers were numb, but the small leather pouch at my waist was heavy with the beautiful, clinking sound of copper coins. My lady, Xiaotsui gasped, staring at the empty crate. We sold them all. But we are out of silk. How will we make more? I looked at the heavy coin pouch, then across the market to the textile vendor selling mountains of raw, undyed wool. The scrunchies were just the gateway product. I had established the brand. Now it was time to scale. We don't need silk anymore, I smiled, tossing a copper coin in the air. We just need to perfect the stitch. Chapter 2. The copper coins from the scrunchies kept the brazier burning for a week, but my capital silk supply was officially depleted. If we were going to survive the winter, I needed a product that relied solely on the coarse, abundant local wool. And I needed it to sell for a premium. I took half of our earnings to the local blacksmith and badgered him until he hammered a crude iron nail into a perfectly smooth 5.5 mm hook. It wasn't ergonomic, but it was a massive upgrade from the bamboo splinter. Then I bought 3 giant sacks of dyed wool, deep indigo charcoal, and a surprisingly rich plum color. We are pivoting to structured winter wear, I announced to Xiaotsui, dumping the yarn onto the floor of the main hall. Hats and thick cowls. The locals need them, and the merchants traveling through Heihe will buy them for the journey further north. But my lady, Xiaotsui said hesitantly, touching the rough wool. Without the silk, it's just peasant yarn. The high-end merchants won't pay silver for this. They will, I said, my eyes gleaming with the manic energy of a crafter on a mission. Because of the architecture. For the next 3 days, my ruined courtyard became an intensive research and development lab. I implemented a strict time management system to save my wrists from cramping, measuring my work blocks and incense sticks, 25 minutes of furious, uninterrupted stitching, followed by 5 minutes of mandatory hand stretches and tea drinking. The problem with crocheting a structured hat in the round is the seam. Standard procedure dictates joining the end of a round to the beginning with a slip stitch, then chaining up to start the next row. It's functional, but it leaves a raised, diagonal scar running down the back of the garment. In the modern world, a visible seam is the hallmark of mass-produced fast fashion or amateur craft. In ancient China, it screamed market stall. A visible seam was the enemy of boutique pricing. I needed the flawless, invisible seamless join. I sat by the brazier, the glow of the coals illuminating the charcoal yarn. I finished a round of half-double crochets. Instead of a standard slip stitch, I pulled the working loop wide, removed my iron hook, inserted it from back to front into the first stitch of the round, grabbed the dropped loop, and pulled it through to the inside of the hat. A tight chain, a carefully placed starting stitch in the same space, and, no, it still looked bulky. I ripped the entire row out, the agonizing frogging process that breaks a crafter's heart, and started again. I adjusted my tension. I experimented with dropping the starting chain entirely and working continuous spirals, but the brim looked jagged. I went back to joined rounds, tweaking the exact placement of the hook on the pull-through. 25 minutes of stitching. 5 minutes of stretching. By the dawn of the 4th day, my fingers were stained indigo, my back ached, and my eyes were bloodshot. But as the morning sun crept through the torn paper windows, I held up the finished plum-colored winter hat. It was perfect. The stitches were incredibly dense, creating a windproof, structured fabric. But more importantly, I spun the hat slowly in my hands. There was no line. There was no ridge. The rows stacked seamlessly on top of each other in a flawless, uninterrupted geometric pattern. It didn't look like a peasant had knit it by the fire. It looked like it had been woven by a machine that hadn't been invented yet. Xiaotsui. I croaked, my voice hoarse. Fetch the wooden crates. We aren't going to the market square today. We are going to the Merchant Guild. The Heihe Merchant Guild was a formidable stone building where the wealthy traders negotiated bulk shipments of fur and iron. The guards at the door sneered at our shabby clothes, but my posture belonged to the arrogant, untouchable Lady Su Wan. They stepped aside. I marched straight up to the desk of Master Lu, the wealthiest textile trader in the region. He looked up from his ledger, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the exiled noblewoman carrying a wooden crate. Lady Su, Master Lu said smoothly, lacking any real respect. The guild does not deal in charity or market scraps. I am not here for charity, Master Lu. I said, matching his tone perfectly. I placed the crate on his polished oak desk and flipped off the linen cover. I am here to offer you a regional monopoly. Master Lu glanced down, prepared to scoff. The scoff died in his throat. He reached out, picking up the charcoal-colored hat. His thumbs rubbed over the dense, structured stitches. His eyes widened. He immediately turned the hat over, his fingers searching the back, then the inside, then the brim. He was looking for the seam. He couldn't find it. How is this constructed? He breathed, holding it up to the light. The integrity of the fabric. There are no weak points. The wind could not penetrate this. And the finishing is impossible. I have seen imperial tailors who cannot hide a join this flawlessly. It is a proprietary technique, I lied smoothly. Highly durable, incredibly warm, and completely seamless. You sell these to the wealthy merchants traveling the northern pass, and you can charge them triple the cost of a fur-lined cap. Fur gets wet and heavy in the snow. This breathes, but it does not yield to the wind. Master Lu set the hat down, his merchant brain rapidly calculating profit margins. He looked at me, seeing me not as a disgraced lady, but as a manufacturer holding the keys to a very lucrative kingdom. How many can you produce in a month? He asked, his tone entirely shifted to one of quiet, greedy respect. Currently? 10 a week, I said, leaning over his desk. But with an upfront investment of 10 silver taels to hire local hands and secure better yarn, I can give you 50 a week. And you will be the sole distributor in Heiha. Master Lu didn't even hesitate. He reached into his robes and pulled out a heavy pouch of silver, placing it on the desk between us. We walked out of the guild 30 minutes later with a signed distribution contract, and enough silver to repair our roof, buy a mountain of premium yarn, and eat meat for dinner. I looked at the silver gleaming in my palm. The seamless join hadn't just saved us from freezing. It had officially put us on the map. Unfortunately, in a border town teetering on the edge of a war zone, a sudden influx of silver and a booming supply chain rarely goes unnoticed by the people heavily armed with swords. Chapter 3. With 10 taels of silver, you can buy a lot of things in a border town. You can fix a collapsed roof, purchase 3 months' worth of salted pork, and hire 5 local women who are desperate for winter wages. But mostly you can buy yarn. My ruined courtyard had been transformed from a depressing exile camp into a fully functional, albeit chaotic, textile manufacturing hub. The main hall was stacked high with bundles of dyed wool, crimson, midnight blue, and a rich earthy moss green. 5 village women sat in a semicircle around 2 newly purchased braziers, their iron hooks flying as I drilled them on tension consistency and the mechanics of the seamless join. Drop the loop, insert from the back, pull through, I chanted, pacing behind them like a drill sergeant with a ball of yarn. If I can see the seam, Master Lu can see the seam. And if Master Lu sees the seam, our premium pricing vanishes. Tension is profit, ladies. Xiao Tsue was currently untangling a massive skein of moss green wool, when the heavy wooden doors of our courtyard didn't just open. They violently exploded inward. The rotting wood splintered off the hinges, crashing into the snow. The village women shrieked, dropping their hooks as a dozen heavily armed soldiers in black iron armor poured into the courtyard, their hands resting menacingly on the hilts of their swords. The temperature in the room, already battling the winter draft, seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Through the shattered doorway stepped a man who looked like he had been carved directly out of the frozen northern mountains. He was terrifyingly tall, wrapped in a heavy wolf fur cloak over dark armor. His face was a study in absolute, uncompromising authority, sharp jaw, straight nose, and eyes as dark and cold as a starless winter night. This was General Huo Ting, commander of the Northern Vanguard. I knew this because the original Su Wan's memories supplied a vague, terrified recollection of the man who guarded the border. He was known as the Iron Ghost, a man entirely devoid of mercy, humor, or warmth. He surveyed my courtyard, his dark eyes sweeping over the terrified village women, the piles of yarn, and finally landing on me. I was currently holding a half-finished crimson hat and an iron hook, wearing a smudge of charcoal on my cheek. "Secure the perimeter," Huo Ting commanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in my chest. "Search the premises for the smuggled iron and contraband." "Excuse me," I said, dropping my hat and stepping over a pile of blue wool. "There is no contraband here. And you owe me a new door." The soldiers froze. Apparently, no one spoke to the Iron Ghost like that. Huo Ting slowly turned his gaze back to me. looking at me as if I were a particularly annoying, suicidal insect. Lady Suwan, the capital exiled you to Heiha to reflect on your crimes and poverty. Yet, within a fortnight, you have flooded the merchant guild with unverified silver. The only industries in this region that generate that kind of immediate capital are illegal salt running and weapon smuggling. He took a step closer, towering over me. Up close he smelled of pine needles, cold steel, and intimidation. Where are you hiding the shipments? I am not running a smuggling ring, General, I said, tilting my head back to look him in the eye, refusing to break contact. I am running a legitimate textile manufacturing business. The silver came from Master Lu. Master Lu is a ruthless opportunist who does not invest in disgraced noblewomen, Huo Ting stated coldly. He looked around the room, genuinely confused by the sheer volume of colorful fuzz. If this is a front, it is an absurdly elaborate one. What is all of this? It is inventory, I sighed, realizing the only way to get this terrifying military tribunal out of my living room was a product demonstration. I picked up a completed, charcoal gray winter hat from the finished pile, and shoved it directly into his armored chest. Huo Ting's reflexes were lightning fast. His gloved hand snapped up, catching the hat before it fell. He looked at the woolen item, his dark brows pulling together in a fierce scowl. A hat, he deadpanned. You claim to have extracted 10 taels of silver from Master Lu for a peasant's winter cap. Take your glove off and feel the density, I instructed, tapping the brim. It's not knit. It's crocheted using a continuous, seamless join. It's practically windproof, it retains heat even when damp, and the structural integrity means it won't unravel if snagged. Huo Ting slowly pulled off his leather gauntlet. His bare hand was calloused and scarred. He ran his long fingers over the fabric, testing the weight. He stretched it, testing the elasticity. Then his eyes narrowed. He flipped the hat over, his fingers searching the interior. Just like the merchant, he was looking for the weak point. He was looking for the seam. He didn't find one. The general looked up from the hat, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a sudden, sharp intensity. The suspicion of smuggling was gone, instantly replaced by the rapid, terrifying calculation of a military commander who had just found a tactical advantage. The northern winds sliced through standard-issue boiled leather and felt, Huo Ting murmured, almost to himself, his thumbs rubbing the dense stitches. My vanguard loses 10% of its fighting capacity every winter to frostbite. Which is a catastrophic logistical failure, I agreed, crossing my arms. Standard felt lacks elasticity, leaving gaps for cold air. My stitch creates a thermal barrier. Huo Ting stared at me. The capital's rumors painted Lady Suwan as a vain, cruel, empty-headed socialite who spent her days plotting petty court dramas. The woman standing in front of him was covered in yarn, lecturing him on thermal barriers, and glaring at him like he was interrupting her workflow. I am confiscating this item as evidence, Huo Ting finally said, tucking the charcoal hat neatly into his belt. Evidence of what? I demanded. Being a functional business? Evidence for field testing, he corrected, turning on his heel. His wolf fur cloak flared out behind him. He looked at his soldiers. Stand down. There is no contraband. Only yarn. He paused at the shattered threshold of my courtyard, looking back at me. The icy, untouchable aura of the iron ghost flickered, replaced by something dangerously close to intrigue. I will return tomorrow at dawn, Lady Su, Huo Ting said, his voice carrying clearly over the howling wind. Have your ledgers prepared. We have business to discuss. He strode out into the snow, his soldiers filing out behind him. Xiaotsue collapsed onto a pile of wool, clutching her chest. My lady, we survived. The iron ghost didn't execute us. I stared at the broken door, my mind already running the numbers. General Huo Ting didn't want to execute me. He wanted to outfit his army. Get up, Xiaotsue. I smiled, picking up my iron hook. Brew some strong tea. We need to calculate a bulk order military discount by morning. Chapter 4. At precisely dawn, the wind howling through the shattered remnants of my courtyard door heralded the return of General Huo Ting. I was waiting for him. I had arranged the only 2 intact chairs in the main hall opposite a small wooden table. A pot of strong, bitter black tea was steaming between them. Alongside a stack of bamboo ledgers I had spent the entire night organizing. Huo Ting stepped into the room, shaking a layer of fresh snow from his heavy wolf fur cloak. I noticed instantly that he was not wearing his standard issue iron helmet. He was wearing my charcoal gray crocheted hat. I see the field test was successful, I noted, gesturing to the chair across from me. Huo Ting pulled the hat from his head, his dark hair slightly ruffled, and sat down. His armor clanked heavily against the fragile bamboo chair. I wore it on the midnight perimeter patrol, he said, his voice a low analytical rumble. The temperature dropped to below freezing. My ears remained entirely unaffected, and the fabric did not stiffen when exposed to sleet. It is a highly efficient tactical garment. It's a beanie, General, I corrected, pouring him a cup of tea. And it retails for 2 silver pieces at the Merchant Guild. But I assume you aren't here to buy one. Huo Ting ignored the tea. He reached inside his cloak and pulled out a thick parchment scroll, unrolling it flat onto the table, and pinning the corners down with his armored gauntlets. The Northern Vanguard consists of 10,000 men, Huo Ting stated, getting straight to the point. 5,000 of them are currently stationed on the active front lines. I require 5,000 thermal under armor vests and 5,000 cowls. Delivery in 2 months. I stared at the sheer volume of the order. My business brain did a rapid calculation. 5,000 sets. Even with an army of village women, the timeline was brutal. I looked down at the parchment. It was a formal military requisition order. General, I said, scanning the brushstrokes. This isn't a merchant contract. This is a conscription order. You are offering me a flat rate of 10 copper coins per garment, and a mandate that I halt all commercial sales to the guild until the military quota is filled. It is a fair wage for peasant yarn, Huo Ting countered smoothly. And as an exiled criminal of the state, your labor is technically forfeit to the crown anyway. You should consider it a generous offer. I consider it a hostile takeover. I shot back, pushing the scroll back toward him. 10 copper coins barely covers the cost of the raw wool, let alone the labor, the dye, and the wear on our tools. If I sign this, I will be operating at a loss. I am a manufacturer, General Huo, not a charity. Huo Ting's eyes narrowed, the temperature in the room dropping again. You are a disgraced noblewoman with no allies, Lady Su. If I order my men to seize your yarn in the name of the Imperial Army, you have no recourse. If you seize my yarn, you get a pile of string. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, completely unfazed by his intimidation tactics. You don't know the stitch. Your men don't know the seamless join. Without me, you have no thermal barrier. You need my proprietary architecture to keep your men from freezing to death. So let's negotiate like adults. For a long, tense moment, we simply stared at each other. The fearsome iron ghost of the North, used to absolute obedience, and the former capital socialite who was currently calculating profit margins in her head. To my surprise, the corner of Huo Ting's mouth twitched, a microscopic break in his stoic armor. State your terms, he commanded softly. 20 coppers per garment, I said immediately. Half paid up front to secure the raw materials and expand my workforce. And I will not halt my commercial sales. I will dedicate 60% of my production bandwidth to the military, but I retain the right to sell my premium goods to the guild. Huo Ting shook his head. The guild relies on traveling merchants to move goods. In winter, the northern pass freezes over. The commercial caravans stop running by next month. Your premium goods will sit in a warehouse. He was right. I knew about supply chain bottlenecks. But I also knew about logistics networks. The commercial caravans stop. I agreed, a slow predatory smile spreading across my face. But the military supply wagons do not. They bring grain and weapons up from the south every 2 weeks. And they go back down completely empty. Huo Ting froze, realizing exactly where I was going. I want access to the military trade routes, I declared. I want guaranteed protected cargo space on your southbound wagons to ship my luxury goods directly to the wealthy southern cities, completely bypassing the frozen passes and the guild's tariffs. Huo Ting stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. You are asking me to use imperial military assets to run a private commercial shipping lane for your yarn. I am offering to dramatically reduce the frostbite casualties of your vanguard in exchange for a minor logistical favor, I corrected smoothly. It's a mutually beneficial synergy. He looked at me, his dark eyes analyzing me with a new, intense focus. He wasn't looking at a spoiled capital brat anymore. He was looking at a strategist. Huo Ting picked up a brush from his belt, dipped it into the inkwell I had provided, and crossed out the entire bottom half of the requisition order. In bold, sharp strokes he wrote in my new terms, 20 coppers, upfront capital, and secure cargo space on the military wagons. He flipped the brush, offering it to me handle first. "You are a remarkably dangerous woman, Lady Sue," Huo Ting murmured, his voice laced with a dark, reluctant respect. "Just highly optimized, General," I replied, taking the brush and signing my name next to his. The ink dried in the freezing air. We were officially in business. Now, I just had to figure out how to produce 10,000 garments in 60 days without my fingers falling off. Chapter 5. 10,000 garments in 60 days required a daily output of exactly 167 items. I didn't need a spreadsheet to know that my current workforce of 5 women was going to fall catastrophically short. With Huo Ting's upfront silver, I executed a massive operational expansion. First, I paid the local carpenter double his asking price to fix my roof and install a heavy, reinforced oak door to replace the one the general had shattered. Then I bought out the blacksmith's entire schedule for 3 days, commissioning 50 identical iron crochet hooks, all hammered to a precise 6mm gauge. Finally, I put out a hiring call. In a border town where winter usually meant starvation and idleness, the promise of a daily wage, 2 hot meals, and a heated workspace drew women from every corner of Heiha. By the end of the week, my repaired courtyard was practically humming. 50 village women sat in organized rows around 6 massive cast iron braziers, their hooks flying in synchronized rhythm. I didn't just teach them to crochet, I implemented a full assembly line. Group A is on base chains and ribbing, I called out, pacing the aisles between the women. Group B, you take the ribbed bands and work the body tubes. Group C, you are on the seamless join and finishing. No garment leaves this floor if the join is visible. If it's crooked, you frog it and start over. Quality control is our brand. I promoted Xiaotsui to floor manager. She traded her weeping for a wooden clipboard, and a terrifyingly sharp eye for dropped stitches. For the first few days, the chaotic energy of the courtyard was entirely consumed by the work. But by day 4, a new, imposing variable was introduced to the factory floor. General Huo Ting began to drop in. His first visit caused a minor panic. 50 women simultaneously dropped their yarn and scrambled to bow as the iron ghost strode into the courtyard, his dark armor absorbing the light of the braziers. "General," I said, barely looking up from the cowl I was finishing. "You are disrupting my workflow. The first shipment isn't due for 2 weeks." "I am conducting a quality control inspection," Huo Ting replied smoothly, his hands resting on his sword belt as his dark eyes scanned the room. "The Imperial Army does not accept substandard equipment." He didn't inspect the equipment. He stood in the corner of the room for 20 minutes, his gaze fixed almost entirely on me as I corrected a weaver's tension, before turning on his heel and leaving. 2 days later he returned. This time he brought 4 soldiers carrying massive sacks of military-grade rice and salted pork. "A logistical supplement," Huo Ting announced, ignoring my raised eyebrow as his men stacked the provisions in our kitchen. "An underfed workforce operates at a suboptimal speed. I am protecting my investment." "How incredibly benevolent of you, General." I deadpanned, though I couldn't deny the relief. Feeding 50 women was eating heavily into my profit margins. By the second week his inspections became a daily occurrence. The women of Heiha, initially terrified of him, slowly realized that the Iron Ghost wasn't there to execute anyone. He would arrive at dusk, just as the shift was ending, leaning against the main pillar of the hall in silence. One evening, after the workers had packed away their hooks and filed out into the snow, I remained by the dying embers of the brazier. I was exhausted. My fingers were cramped into claws, and my shoulders ached from demonstrating the seamless join to a new batch of hires. I was aggressively rubbing my thumb joint when a shadow fell over me. Huo Ting crouched down beside my chair. Up close, the terrifying aura he projected to the world seemed to dial back, leaving just the quiet, intense focus of a man who missed absolutely nothing. Without asking for permission, he reached out and took my hands in his. I froze. His bare hands were massive, rough with sword calluses, and surprisingly warm against my freezing skin. He didn't say a word. He simply began to massage the cramped muscles at the base of my thumbs, his thumbs pressing into the exact pressure points that were radiating pain. "You push your assets to the point of structural failure," Huo Ting murmured, his voice a low rumble in the quiet, empty hall. "Including yourself." "I have a quota to meet." I breathed, my heart executing a completely illogical, rapid flutter at the sensation of his rough hands methodically working the tension out of my joints. And I don't fail to deliver on a contract. I am aware, he said softly. He looked down at my hands, his dark eyes tracing the faint indigo dye stains on my fingertips. But a commander must ensure his lead architect remains functional. If your hands fail, the supply chain breaks. Is that what I am? I asked, looking at the sharp, unforgiving lines of his profile. A supply chain? Huo Ting stopped rubbing my hands, but he didn't let them go. He slowly lifted his gaze to meet mine. The air between us suddenly felt incredibly thick, the crackle of the dying brazier the only sound in the room. You are the most unpredictable variable I have ever encountered on the frontier, Su Wan, Huo Ting said, his voice dropping an octave. I am still determining exactly what you are. He held my gaze for a long, heavy second before releasing my hands. He stood up smoothly, his armor clanking softly in the quiet room. I have arranged for the first military wagon to depart for the southern capital in 3 days, he said, instantly shifting back into the stoic commander. Have your luxury crates ready. I will ensure they are heavily guarded. As he walked out into the frozen night, I looked down at my hands. The cramping was completely gone. In its place was a lingering warmth that had absolutely nothing to do with thermal wool, and a growing realization that keeping this relationship strictly business was going to be the hardest logistical challenge of my life. Chapter 6. The northern frontier was a land of absolute extremes. For 6 months of the year, it was a frozen, unforgiving wasteland. But when the thaw finally arrived, the transition was violently abrupt. By the 5th month, the snow had completely melted, and Heiha was baking under a sweltering, oppressive summer sun. Our military contract for the thermal gear had been fulfilled weeks ago, yielding a massive, flawless return on investment. Between the military payout and the luxury goods I had successfully shipped south via Huo Ting's supply wagons, the Su Wan handmade empire was flush with silver. However, a seasonal business is a vulnerable business. Wool in the summer was dead weight. We are pivoting, I announced to Xiaotsue, dumping a massive crate of imported undyed cotton linen yarn onto the floor of my newly renovated, well-ventilated workshop. This is a breathable plant-based fiber. It has zero thermal retention, incredible drape, and it doesn't chafe when you sweat. Xiaotsue poked the pale, thin yarn cautiously. But my lady, what can you make with this? A summer shawl. A shawl is just a blanket with better PR, I said, grabbing a smaller, 3.5mm hook I had commissioned. No. We are revolutionizing summer leisure wear. I retreated to my private quarters and spent the next 2 days furiously working. The cotton linen blend was slippery and required a much tighter tension than the forgiving wool, but the stitch definition was stunning. I utilized a complex, open lace shell stitch, creating a structured bodice that tied securely behind the neck and laced up the lower back, leaving the shoulders, arms, and midriff completely free. It was the classic, modern crochet halter top. In my previous life, it was a music festival staple. In ancient China, it was a weapon of mass distraction. My lady, absolutely not. Xiaotsue shrieked when I finally modeled the prototype for her. She covered her eyes with her hands, though her fingers were splayed wide enough to peek through. Your collarbones. Your arms. The heavens can see your navel. It is 90 degrees outside, Xiaotsue, I sighed, doing a slow spin. The cream-colored cotton hugged my torso perfectly, the lace pattern intricate and delicate. It was the most physically comfortable I had been in months. Sweating through 3 layers of heavy brocade silk is inefficient and unhygienic. This provides maximum airflow. It provides maximum scandal, she wailed. If anyone sees you. The heavy oak door to my private courtyard swung open. Lady Su, the southern caravan ledger requires your. General Huo Ting froze mid-sentence, one armored boot stepping over the threshold. He was dressed in his lighter summer uniform, dark leather, a fitted black tunic, and no heavy fur cloak, but the terrifying, imposing aura of the Iron Ghost was fully intact. At least, it was, until his brain processed what I was wearing. Huo Ting's dark eyes locked onto my bare shoulders. Then, they tracked down the delicate lace pattern of the bodice, hitting the exposed sliver of skin at my midriff. For the first time since I had met the man, General Huo Ting experienced a complete, catastrophic system failure. His jaw locked. His chest stopped moving. The man literally forgot how to breathe. A dark, furious flush rapidly crept up his neck, highly visible against his usually pale, stoic face. General. I smiled brightly, entirely unashamed. I put my hands on my hips, adjusting my posture to fully showcase the drape of the cotton. Perfect timing. We are launching a new product line. What do you think of the prototype? Huo Ting spun around so violently his sword scabbard smacked against the doorframe. He presented his broad back to me, his shoulders rigid with a terrifying amount of tension. Where's the rest of your garment, Suwan? He ground out, his voice a full octave lower than usual, rough and strained. There is no rest of the garment, I explained, walking a few steps closer to his back. It's a halter top, optimized for extreme heat. The open back architecture allows for complete evaporation of perspiration. It is a hazard to public order. Huo Ting snapped, refusing to turn around. His hands were curled into tight fists at his sides. You cannot sell this. The local magistrate will arrest you for inciting a riot. It's not for the Heiha market. I rolled my eyes, grabbing a lightweight silk robe from my screen and shrugging it on over the halter top. I tied it loosely at the waist. It's for the capital market. The wealthy noblewomen in the south are desperate for new, daring trends. If I brand this as a rebel luxury item, I can charge 10 taels of silver apiece. You can turn around now, General. I am suitably covered. Huo Ting slowly turned back around. His eyes immediately darted to my collarbones, confirming the silk robe was indeed covering the scandalous lace, before he finally managed to look me in the eye. The blush had faded, but his dark eyes were burning with an intensity that had absolutely nothing to do with anger. You intend to put other women in that structure, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Only the ones who can afford it, I said, walking over to the table to retrieve his ledgers. Huo Ting stepped closer, closing the distance between us until I had to tilt my head back to look at him. The heat radiating off him had nothing to do with the summer sun. I am the military commander of this region, Lady Su, Huo Ting murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to the knot of my silk robe before snapping back to my eyes. I am responsible for the security of all goods moving through the pass. I am officially— I raised an eyebrow. Contraband? You're banning my halter tops from the supply wagons. I am banning them from the public, he corrected smoothly, his voice dropping to a low, possessive rumble. If you wish to produce them, you will produce them exclusively for a single buyer. Me. I stared at him, my entrepreneurial brain stalling out completely. General, you don't wear cotton linen lace. And you definitely don't have the collarbones for a halter top. A tiny, wicked smirk touched the corner of Huo Ting's mouth, a rare, devastating break in his armor. I have no intention of wearing it, he said softly, leaning down so his lips were mere inches from my ear. But I have every intention of monopolizing the inventory. If you wear that again, Suwan, it will be strictly behind closed doors. With me. He stepped back, entirely composed once more, and tapped the ledger on the table. Review the southern tariffs, Lady Su. I will return at dusk to collect the paperwork. He strode out of the courtyard, leaving the heavy oak door open behind him. I stood completely still, my heart hammering a frantic, highly inefficient rhythm against my ribs. My lady, Xiaotsue squeaked from the corner, still covering her eyes. Did the general execute us? No, Xiaotsue, I breathed, touching the hot skin of my cheek. But he just successfully negotiated a monopoly. And I think I just lost my mind. Chapter 7. To a manufacturer, there is no sound more terrifying than a silent factory floor. It was mid-July, the peak of the summer production rush, and my courtyard should have been humming with the synchronized clicking of 50 iron hooks. Instead, 50 women were sitting idly on their bamboo stools, drinking tea and looking anxiously toward the gate. 3 days late, I muttered, pacing the length of the empty storage hall with my clipboard. A supply wagon doesn't just lose 3 days on the main Imperial Road. The weather is clear. The roads are dry. Perhaps a broken axle, my lady? Xiaotsue offered weakly, though she looked just as stressed as I felt. A broken axle takes half a day to repair. I snapped, tapping my charcoal pencil against the bamboo ledger. This is a deliberate bottleneck. My suspicions were confirmed an hour later when a battered, bruised wagon driver limped into my courtyard. He didn't have my 2 tons of premium, undyed cotton linen yarn. He only had a black eye and a message. Bandits, Lady Su, the driver groaned, clutching his ribs as Xiaotsue handed him a cup of water. Just 20 miles south of Heiha, outside the Vanguard's patrol zone, They didn't touch the grain wagons ahead of us. They specifically targeted your yarn. They dragged the crates off into the foothills and told us if we drove for the Sioux brand again, they'd burn the carts. My blood ran cold, instantly replaced by a boiling, entrepreneurial rage. Bandits didn't stel raw, un spoon coton linen. It had zero street value to a highwayman. You couldn't eat it, you couldn't forge it into weapons, and without my specific crochet patterns, you couldn't sell it. This was a targeted hit on my supply chain. I knew exactly who had ordered it. Master Chun, the regional silk baron, had been furious ever since my breathable summer wear had completely tanked the demand for his heavy, overpriced summer brocades. He couldn't compete with my product, so he had cut off my raw materials. And because the ambush happened just outside Heiha's borders, it was a civil matter. I dismissed the workers for the day with half pay, the loss of silver physically paining me. I sat alone in the main hall, staring at the empty braziers, running the numbers. Without that yarn, I would default on 3 major southern contracts. The brand's reputation would tank. Dusk fell. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and the familiar, heavy tread of armored boots echoed across the stone floor. General Huo Ting stopped in the center of the room. He took one look at the empty stools, the unlit braziers, and my furious posture, and his posture immediately shifted from a relaxed commander to a predator sensing blood in the water. Why is the facility non-operational? Huo Ting asked, his voice low and sharp. I have a supply chain issue, I said bitterly, tossing my clipboard onto the table. My raw materials were intercepted by bandits 20 miles south. It's a localized sabotage funded by Master Chen. My production is halted indefinitely. Huo Ting's eyes narrowed. Have you reported this to the local magistrate? The magistrate is in Chen's pocket. I scoffed, burying my face in my hands. Even if he wasn't, the jurisdiction is a nightmare. It's outside your military zone, General. You can't deploy troops for a civil mercantile dispute. I'm going to have to pay Chen off, or hire a private mercenary escort for future shipments. It's going to decimate my profit margins. Huo Ting didn't say anything. I looked up. He was staring at the empty factory floor, a muscle ticking in his strong jaw. The temperature in the room plummeted, the oppressive summer heat entirely neutralized by the absolute, glacial fury radiating from the Iron Ghost. They touched your inventory, Huo Ting said. It wasn't a question. It sounded like a death sentence. Yes, I sighed. 2 tons of cotton linen. Jurisdiction, Huo Ting murmured softly, his hand resting on the hilt of his heavy broadsword, is a bureaucratic suggestion. A suggestion that I do not entertain when a hostile entity threatens my lead architect. He turned on his heel. Huo Ting, wait. I called out, jumping up from my chair. You can't mobilize the vanguard for yarn. The imperial court will accuse you of abusing military power for private commerce. I am not mobilizing the vanguard, Suwan, he said, pausing at the door, his silhouette terrifying against the twilight. I am taking a midnight ride. I suggest you have your workers return at dawn. Your supply chain will be operational. He didn't wait for my response. He vanished into the night. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of my private quarters, watching the moon track slowly across the sky. My stomach tied in a knot of complex, terrifying anxiety. I wasn't worried about the yarn anymore. I was worried about the man who was currently risking his military career, his reputation, and his life over my cotton blend. Just as the horizon began to bleed a pale, pre-dawn purple, the sound of heavy wooden wheels rattling against cobblestone echoed through the quiet streets. I bolted out of my quarters and threw open the courtyard doors. 3 massive merchant carts were parked in the street, piled high with my pristine wooden crates of yarn. And sitting atop a massive, black warhorse leading the carts was General Huo Ting. He looked devastating. He was not wearing his formal armor, just dark leather riding gear. He was covered in a fine layer of road dust, and there was a streak of dark, undeniable blood across his cheekbone. His eyes, however, were bright and piercing as he looked down at me. Behind him, 4 of his most elite, terrifying lieutenants were riding shotgun on the carts. They looked like they had just enjoyed a very vigorous workout. Huo Ting swung down from his horse. He walked up to me, pulling a crumpled, blood-stained manifest from his leather belt, and placed it directly into my hands. Inventory recovered, Huo Ting stated, his voice a rough, exhausted rumble. The bandits have been permanently relieved of their highway duties. And Master Chen has received a persuasive midnight visit regarding his future business practices. I stared at the manifest, then up at his bruised, dirty, impossibly handsome face. My heart wasn't fluttering. It was actively trying to break out of my ribcage. You went outside your zone, I whispered, reaching out without thinking. I pressed my thumb against the cut on his cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of dust. You could be court-martialed for this. Over yarn. Huo Ting didn't pull away from my touch. Instead, he leaned down, his dark eyes entirely focused on my mouth before slowly lifting to meet my gaze. I did not ride out for the yarn, Suwan, he murmured, his voice so low it was meant only for me. I rode out because someone attempted to take something that belongs to you. And I have discovered that I am a deeply possessive man. He covered my hand with his, pressing my palm firmly against his cheek for a fleeting, electric second, before stepping back. Commence your production, Lady Su. The Iron Ghost commanded, a faint, devastating smirk playing on his lips as he turned back to his men. Your monopoly is secure. Chapter 8. The fleeting northern summer vanished just as abruptly as it had arrived. By late September, the sweltering heat was replaced by a biting, crisp chill that swept down from the mountains, turning the leaves yellow and my thoughts back to thermal retention. It was time to pivot the inventory again. The beanies and cowls are staples, I explained to my floor managers, huddled around my desk. But we need a new luxury item to drive the winter launch. Something structured. Something that protects the face from the wind. I pulled out my sketchbook. We are introducing the winter bucket hat. Doing the yarn math on a structured, wide brim was significantly more complex than calculating the continuous spirals of a standard beanie. I had to factor in a heavy gauge and precisely timed increase rounds to ensure the brim flared out at a perfectly rigid, protective angle without flopping into the wearer's eyes. I settled on the waistcoat stitch, a variation of the single crochet where the hook is inserted directly into the post of the previous stitch rather than the top loops. It was agonizingly slow and brutally hard on the hands, but it created a fabric so dense it looked like woven knitwear and functioned like a windproof helmet. To justify the steep five-tail price tag, I insisted on elevating the presentation. Quality goods required aesthetic packaging. Once the first batch of 50 charcoal gray bucket hats was complete, I had the workers carefully wrap each one in a crisp square of unbleached parchment, tied off with a clean strand of undyed wool, and stamped with a red wax seal bearing the character Su. It looked expensive. It looked like capital luxury. Take this batch to Master Lu at the guild, I instructed Xiaotsue, admiring the neat stack of boxes. Tell him this is a limited trial run. Do not negotiate the price. Xiaotsue loaded the 50 boxes onto a handcart and pushed it out into the brisk morning air. I sat back down at my desk, ready to crunch the production numbers for the next wave, expecting Xiaotsue to be gone for at least half the day haggling with the guild merchants. She was back in 20 minutes. The handcart was completely empty, and Xiaotsue looked out of breath and bewildered, clutching a heavy, clinking pouch of silver. Sold out, she panted, dropping the silver onto my desk. Every single one. I stared at the pouch. Xiaotsue, you didn't even make it to the guild, did you? I was halfway down the market street, she explained, still looking shell-shocked. A merchant on horseback wearing a heavy cloak and a low hat stopped the cart. He asked if these were the new Su winter goods. I said yes, and stated the five-tail price, expecting him to laugh. He just tossed me a bag of premium imperial silver, and told his guards to take the entire cart. I frowned, picking up a silver ingot. It was stamped with the official crest of the Imperial Treasury. Private merchants didn't carry this kind of uncirculated silver. Only government officials did. Or military commanders. A terrible, hilarious suspicion began to form in my mind. Xiaotsue. I sighed, grabbing my cloak. I am going to the vanguard encampment. Keep the women working on the second batch. The Northern Vanguard's main camp was a sprawling, highly disciplined fortress of iron and canvas located just outside the city walls. As I approached the command tent, the guards didn't even cross their spears to stop me. They had long since realized that attempting to bar Lady Su from seeing the general was a surefire way to end up on latrine duty. I didn't wait to be announced. I threw back the heavy canvas flap of the command tent and marched inside. General Huo Ting was standing over his massive tactical map table. He was flanked by 3 of his top lieutenants, all of them staring down at the table with expressions of absolute, profound confusion. They weren't looking at troop movements or supply lines. They were staring at 50 aesthetically packaged, wax-sealed boxes stacked in a massive pyramid right in the middle of the war room. "General," Lieutenant Zhao was saying, rubbing his forehead, "I do not understand the logistical strategy here. Why has the Vanguard acquired 50 luxury women's civilian hats? Are we attempting to bribe the enemy with winter fashion?" "It is a classified tactical acquisition," Huo Ting replied smoothly, his face an impenetrable mask of stoicism. "Do not question the supply chain, Zhao." "Classified?" Zhao repeated, sounding desperate. "Sir, they are stamped with wax seals. And we are an army of 10,000 men. What are 50 hats going to?" "Ahem." I cleared my throat loudly. All 4 men snapped to attention, turning to face me. Huo Ting's dark eyes locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, the Iron Ghost looked exactly like a man who had been caught red-handed. "Lieutenants," Huo Ting barked, his voice echoing in the tent. "Dismissed." The 3 men practically sprinted out of the tent, throwing thoroughly confused glances at the pyramid of hats as they left. Once we were alone, I slowly walked over to the tactical table. I picked up one of the parchment-wrapped packages, running my thumb over the red wax seal. "A classified tactical acquisition, General?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at him. "At 5 taels apiece? That is a terrible use of your discretionary budget." Huo Ting stood tall, crossing his arms over his chest. He refused to look ashamed. "I was informed by my patrol that your new product line was moving to the guild. The regional economy is fragile. I deemed it necessary to stimulate the market with an immediate capital injection." "You bought out my entire stock anonymously because you wanted my launch to be a success," I corrected, trying to fight the massive smile spreading across my face. "I am protecting a critical infrastructure asset," he stated stubbornly, though the tips of his ears were turning slightly red. "Huo Ting, I am a profitable enterprise. I don't need a silent investor." I put the box down and stepped closer to him. The sheer absurdity of this terrifying, lethal warrior quietly buying up a mountain of crochet bucket hats to support my business was making my heart melt into a puddle. "What are you even going to do with 50 identical civilian hats?" Huo Ting looked down at me, his stoic facade finally cracking into a soft, devastatingly fond expression. "I have not calculated that variable yet," he admitted, his voice dropping to a low, warm rumble. He reached out, his callous fingers gently catching a loose strand of hair that had escaped my updo. "But if I must wear a different one every day for the next 2 months to justify the purchase, I will." "You'd look ridiculous," I laughed softly, leaning into his touch. "I would look highly optimized," he corrected, tracing my jawline. "Your tension is flawless, Suwan." Chapter 9. By December, the Su handmade enterprise was no longer just a business. It was the backbone of Heiha's economy. My renovated courtyard had expanded into 3 adjoining properties. I now employed over 200 women, managing a complex, tiered production schedule that turned raw northern wool into premium, highly priced luxury goods. The southern elites were practically fighting each other to purchase my seamless cowls and structured bucket hats. The silver flowed in, the Vanguard stayed warm, and for the first time since my transmigration, I felt completely secure. Which meant, naturally, it was the perfect time for everything to go catastrophically wrong. I was sitting at my heavy oak desk in the main hall, reviewing the quarterly profit ledgers, when Xiaotsue burst through the doors. She wasn't just panicked, she was ghostly pale, trembling so violently her teeth chattered. "My lady," she gasped, gripping the doorframe. "The imperial banners. They are in the market square. They are coming here." My brush froze over the bamboo ledger. The imperial banners meant the emperor's personal envoys. The capital had ignored my existence for 8 months. They had sent me here to freeze to death and be forgotten. They shouldn't be here. "Halt production," I ordered immediately, standing up and smoothing down my thick, charcoal gray robes. "Tell the women to pack away the premium yarn and stand down. Do not let them see our full inventory." It was too late. Before Xiaotsue could even cross the courtyard, a squad of heavily armed imperial guards, dressed in the flashy ceremonial gold and crimson armor of the capital, marched through my gates. They forcibly shoved my workers aside, making way for a man carried in an enclosed palanquin. Minister Liang stepped out. I remembered him from the original Su Wan's memories. A slimy, ambitious court bureaucrat who had been one of the loudest voices calling for my exile. He was dressed in layers of ridiculously thin, ostentatious summer silk, shivering visibly in the biting northern wind, but his face was set in a mask of supreme arrogance. He surveyed my bustling, wealthy courtyard, his eyes landing greedily on the stacks of raw materials and the heavy lockboxes in my office. "Lady Su," Minister Liang sneered, stepping into my main hall without an invitation. "It seems the rumors of your demise in this frozen wasteland were greatly exaggerated. In fact, you seem to be living quite comfortably for a disgraced criminal." "Minister Liang," I replied coolly, refusing to bow. "To what do I owe the displeasure of your visit? I assure you, my taxes are fully paid to the local magistrate." Liang pulled a heavy scroll from his sleeve. It was bound in imperial yellow silk. "The imperial court is not interested in your petty local taxes," Liang said, unrolling the scroll with a dramatic snap. "Word of a massive economic boom in the north has reached the emperor's ears. It is highly irregular for a banished subject to amass such wealth that rightfully belongs to the crown." He cleared his throat and began to read. "The Son of Heaven, in his boundless mercy, recognizes the rehabilitation of Lady Su Wan. Her exile is hereby lifted. She is to return to the capital immediately. Furthermore, to atone for her past crimes, all assets, production facilities, and trade routes belonging to the Su enterprise are hereby nationalized and absorbed into the imperial treasury." The room spun. They weren't here to forgive me. They were here for a hostile takeover. They had seen my profit margins, and the emperor wanted his cut. They were going to steal my entire supply chain, ship me back to the toxic, plotting capital, and likely hand my factory over to someone like Master Chin. "You cannot nationalize this facility," I said, my voice dangerously calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I hold a legally binding, exclusive merchant contract with the Northern Vanguard. I am the primary military contractor for General Huo Ting. My production bandwidth is entirely allocated to the defense of the border." Minister Liang laughed, a high, nasal sound that echoed in the quiet room. "A regional military requisition?" he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Lady Su, an imperial edict supersedes any provincial military contract. General Huo Ting is a servant of the emperor. His little frontier agreements are void the moment the capital demands otherwise." Liang turned to his imperial guards. "Seize the lockboxes, confiscate the ledgers, and begin loading the finished inventory onto our wagons. Do not touch my ledgers." I stepped forward, placing myself between the guards and my desk. "This is private property." "You have no property, criminal," Liang spat, dropping the polite facade. "Move her aside. If she resists, bind her hands." Two massive imperial guards stepped toward me, reaching out to grab my arms. I braced myself, my mind desperately trying to formulate an escape plan, a legal loophole, anything. "If either of you lay a single hand on her, I will sever it at the wrist." The voice didn't just fill the room. It seemed to drop the atmospheric pressure to an absolute, freezing zero. The imperial guards froze. Minister Liang whirled around. Standing in the doorway was General Huo Ting. He wasn't wearing his casual leather riding gear today. He was fully armored in his terrifying, spiked black iron plates. His wolf fur cloak practically swallowed the light, and his hand rested casually, lethally, on the hilt of his broadsword. Behind him, standing shoulder to shoulder, were 20 of the Vanguard's most elite, battle-hardened soldiers. Huo Ting didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at Minister Liang. His dark, furious eyes locked immediately onto me, checking me for injury. "General Hua," Minister Liang sputtered, attempting to regain his authority. "You are interrupting an imperial decree. I am acting on behalf of the emperor to seize this contraband and return this woman to the capital." Huo Ting slowly shifted his gaze to the minister. The look in his eyes was so violently cold that Liang physically took a step backward. "You are standing in a Vanguard military production zone," Huo Ting stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that promised absolute violence. "You are attempting to seize Vanguard logistical assets. And you are threatening my lead architect." He took a slow, deliberate step into the room. "Your imperial decree is void in my territory, minister," the Iron Ghost whispered. "Get out of her courtyard." Chapter 10. Minister Liang did not leave quietly. Faced with 20 heavily armed Vanguard elites and a commander who looked ready to commit a felony on the spot, the Imperial Guards had wisely lowered their weapons. But as Liang was bundled back into his palanquin, he leaned out the window, his face purple with rage. This is treason, Huo Ting. Liang spat, his voice cracking. I carry the emperor's seal. I will send a raven to the capital tonight. When the royal army marches north, they will strip you of your rank, mount your head on the city walls, and drag this criminal back in chains. Huo Ting didn't even blink. Ensure your raven flies fast, minister. The northern winds are unforgiving. The moment the imperial entourage retreated from the courtyard, the heavy tension in the room shattered. The workers immediately began whispering in terrified, hushed tones. Il looked at Huo Ting. His jaw was clenched, his eyes tracking the retreating palanquin with cold, tactical calculation. He had just threatened an imperial envoy. He had just put his entire military career, and the lives of his 10,000 men, on the line for my crochet factory. It was a catastrophically bad return on investment. General, I said quietly, stepping closer to him so the workers wouldn't hear. You cannot fight the capital. If Liang sends that raven, the emperor will declare the northern vanguard a rebel faction. You cannot start a civil war over a supply chain. I will secure the perimeter of Heiha, Huo Ting replied smoothly, turning his dark eyes back to me. No imperial ravens will leave this city. No riders will pass the southern gates. You will continue production, Suwan. He turned and strode out of the courtyard, shouting orders to his lieutenants to lock down the city. I watched him go, my entrepreneurial brain running a frantic, terrifying risk assessment. Huo Ting could blockade the city for a week, maybe a month. But eventually, the capital would notice the silence. The royal army would come. If I stayed in Heiha, I would be the catalyst for the destruction of the northern vanguard. I would be the variable that crashed his entire system. I was a businesswoman. I knew when a hostile takeover had too much backing capital. The only logical move was to liquidate the assets and abandon the facility. Xiaotsue, I whispered, turning to my floor manager. Dismiss the women. Pay them double for the month. Then go to the lockboxes. Xiaotsue's eyes went wide. My lady, take only the imperial silver, the iron hooks and the prototype patterns, I ordered, my heart aching as I looked around the bustling, thriving courtyard I had built from nothing. Pack 2 thick cloaks. We are liquidating the enterprise. We leave at midnight. By the time the moon was high in the freezing night sky, the Su handmade enterprise was effectively dissolved. Xiaotsue and I sat in a small, unmarked wooden carriage I had purchased for an exorbitant sum of silver. We were heading for the northernmost gate, the one that led out into the untamed, lawless frozen steppes, far away from the emperor's reach. The carriage wheels crunched softly in the fresh snow. I pulled my seamless cowl up over my nose, shivering, though the cold wasn't entirely to blame. Leaving Heiha meant leaving the factory. It meant leaving the supply routes. It meant leaving Huo Ting. Halt. The single word cut through the freezing air like a blade. The carriage violently jerked to a stop. I pushed the wooden window slat open, my breath catching in my throat. Blocking the narrow archway of the northern gate, sitting atop his massive black warhorse, was General Huo Ting. The moonlight caught the sharp, unforgiving edges of his iron armor. He was completely alone, but he looked like an impenetrable fortress wall. I climbed out of the carriage, my silk boots sinking into the snow. Huo Ting, I pleaded, walking up to his horse. Let us pass. You blockaded the southern gates, but you knew I would take the northern one. It's simple logic. I am removing the liability from your territory. If I am gone, Liang has no proof, the emperor has no target, and your vanguard remains secure. Huo Ting swung down from his saddle. He landed silently in the snow, towering over me. You are attempting to void our contract, Su Wan, he said, his voice dangerously low. I am attempting to save your life. I shot back, frustration and fear finally bubbling over. A merchant contract is not worth a treason charge. It's bad business, Huo Ting. You are a brilliant tactician. You know the math. Let me go. Huo Ting stared down at me. The icy, stoic mask of the Iron Ghost was completely gone, replaced by a raw, burning intensity that took my breath away. He reached into his armored chest plate and pulled out a folded piece of thick parchment. I recognized the heavy wax seal. It was our original, legally binding military merchant contract. Without breaking eye contact, Huo Ting took the parchment in both hands and ripped it straight down the middle. I gasped as he tore it again, the heavy paper shredding under his strength. He tossed the pieces into the freezing wind, letting them scatter into the snow like dead leaves. You are correct, Huo Ting murmured, stepping into my space, his massive presence blocking out the wind, the gate, and the rest of the world. A business partnership is too easily dissolved by imperial law. A merchant can be audited. A military contractor can be replaced, seized, or banished. He reached out, his calloused hands gently cupping my face, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. The heat radiating from his touch was a violent contrast to the freezing night. But the capital's laws are highly specific regarding the Northern Vanguard, he continued, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that commanded my absolute attention. The emperor cannot seize the assets, or dictate the residence, of a vanguard commander's wife. My heart stopped. I stared up into his dark, entirely serious eyes. My brilliant, terrifying tactician wasn't just breaking the law. He was rewriting the entire legal framework to build an impenetrable firewall around me. A marriage contract, I whispered, my voice trembling. Huo Ting, you would tie yourself to a disgraced exile to protect a supply chain. I would tie myself to you, Su Wan, to protect my sanity, he corrected fiercely. His thumbs traced my jawline. The supply chain is irrelevant. The silver is irrelevant. You are the only asset I refuse to surrender. Marry me. We will integrate our operations permanently. And I swear to you, the emperor himself will not be able to touch a single thread of your yarn. I looked at the scattered, torn pieces of our merchant contract in the snow, and then up at the man who was offering to burn down the entire world to keep me warm. General, I breathed, rising onto my tiptoes, sliding my arms up the cold, hard iron of his chest plate to wrap around his neck. That is the most aggressive acquisition strategy one have ever seen. Do you accept the terms? He whispered, his lips brushing against mine. I accept, I murmured, right before he kissed me, entirely neutralizing the freezing northern wind. Chapter 11. The morning sun had barely crested the jagged peaks of the northern mountains when Minister Liang decided he had run out of patience. Trapped in Heihe by Huo Ting's citywide military lockdown, the imperial envoy had spent the night stewing in his commandeered magistrate's compound. If he couldn't leave with the inventory, he would leave with the criminal. He assembled his 50 gold-clad imperial guards and marched them directly toward my courtyard, determined to execute an arrest for high treason. He expected to find a terrified, fleeing woman. Instead, when Liang's guards kicked open the newly repaired oak doors of my courtyard, they found me sitting serenely in the center of the main hall, drinking jasmine tea. In my lap rested a massive, colorful blanket I was actively assembling. I calmly looped my yarn, joining another intricate, geometric granny square to the expanding textile. Lady Su, Minister Liang barked, his face red with the biting cold and sheer indignation. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Your little blockade charade ends now. You are officially under arrest for defying an imperial edict and conspiring to hoard crown assets. Guards, seize her and burn this peasant yarn to the ground. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up from my hook. I finished the seamless join on the granny square, snipped the yarn with my shears, and took a slow sip of my tea. I wouldn't do that, Minister, I advised mildly. The Vanguard is very protective of my peasant yarn. The Vanguard is a provincial militia that will bow to the Emperor's seal. Liang shrieked. Seize her. The Imperial Guards drew their swords and took exactly 2 steps forward. Then the ground began to shake. It started as a low, rhythmic vibration that rattled the teacup against my saucer. Then the sound of thousands of heavy, iron-shod boots marching in absolute, terrifying unison echoed through the narrow streets of Heihe. The noise was deafening, a localized earthquake of military might. Minister Liang spun around, his jaw dropping. Pouring into the streets, filling every alleyway, rooftop, and available inch of space surrounding my courtyard, was the entire Northern Vanguard. 10,000 battle-hardened soldiers in black iron armor had mobilized. They didn't shout. They didn't break formation. They simply surrounded the 50 Imperial Guards in a sea of impenetrable, silent steel. The sea of black armor parted down the center. General Huo Ting strode into the courtyard. He was dressed for war. His heavy broadsword was drawn, resting casually against his shoulder. His dark eyes locked onto Minister Liang with the glacial, uncompromising lethality of the Iron Ghost. General Huo. Minister Liang's voice cracked, his arrogant facade completely shattering as he realized he was entirely surrounded. What is the meaning of this? You are mobilizing an army against an imperial envoy. This is open rebellion. Huo Ting stopped a few feet away from Liang. He didn't raise his voice, but the terrifying baritone carried effortlessly across the silent courtyard. I am not mobilizing against the Crown Minister Liang, Huo Ting stated flatly. I am securing my military supply chain. And I am defending my household. Huo Ting reached into his armored chest plate with his free hand. He pulled out a scroll of heavy parchment, stamped with the official wax seal of the regional magistrate, and tossed it into the snow at Liang's feet. Liang scrambled to pick it up, his eyes darting frantically over the ink. A marriage registry? Liang choked out, the parchment trembling in his hands. Dated at midnight? You married a disgraced exile. I married the lead architect of the Northern Vanguard, Huo Ting corrected, taking a slow, predatory step forward. Under imperial law, the crown cannot seize the private assets of a Vanguard commander's wife, nor can they dictate her residence. Her enterprise is now officially integrated into the military infrastructure of this border. This is a sham. Liang sputtered, though he was physically backing away. The emperor will not recognize this. You are protecting a criminal. I am protecting the woman who designed the airy-ribbed thermal cowls that kept 5,000 of my men from freezing to death last winter. Huo Ting's voice dropped to a dangerous, deadly whisper. If you arrest my wife, production halts. If production halts, my men freeze. If my men freeze, the northern border falls. Huo Ting raised his broadsword, pointing the gleaming steel directly at Minister Liang's chest. An attack on Lady Su is an attack on the Northern Vanguard, Huo Ting declared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. And we respond to hostile threats with absolute prejudice. Tell me, Minister, do you still wish to execute your arrest warrant? In perfect, terrifying unison, 10,000 Vanguard soldiers drew their swords. The metallic shing rang out like a thunderclap across the city. Minister Liang looked at the wall of black iron, then at the lethal edge of Huo Ting's sword, and finally, he looked at me. I was still sitting in my chair, casually folding my granny square blanket. I gave him a polite, corporate smile. As I said, Minister, a hostile takeover requires sufficient backing capital. You are vastly out-resourced. Liang dropped the marriage registry in the snow. He didn't say another word. He practically scrambled over his own guards to get back to his palanquin, screaming at his men to retreat. The Imperial Guard sheathed their weapons and fled the courtyard as fast as their ceremonial armor would allow. Silence descended on the courtyard once more. Huo Ting sheathed his sword. He turned away from the retreating Imperial forces and walked toward me. The terrifying, warlord aura dissipated with every step, leaving only the man who had torn up a contract in the snow to save my life. He stopped in front of my chair, looking down at the colorful blanket in my lap, and then up to my face. The hostile entity has been liquidated from the premises, Madame Su. I stood up, dropping the yarn, and closed the distance between us. I rested my hands flat against his cold iron chest plate. Mobilizing 10,000 men for a property dispute, General? I breathed, looking up into his dark eyes. That is an incredible display of operational loyalty. I am a highly possessive investor, Huo Ting replied softly, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me flush against his armor. And the monopoly is officially mine. Chapter 12. Organizing a military blockade was child's play compared to the logistical nightmare of planning a frontier wedding in under a week. But I was a manufacturer. I understood supply chains, delegation, and the sheer power of yarn math. Since the capital had formally, if unwillingly, recognized our union, I had total freedom to rebrand the entire courtyard. I shut down commercial production for 3 days and reallocated my 200 workers to a single massive project. My wedding decor. The results were a masterpiece of textile engineering. Instead of fragile paper lanterns that would tear in the harsh northern winds, the courtyard was illuminated by hundreds of rigid, open-lace crocheted lanterns, dyed a vibrant, auspicious crimson. They were suspended from the rooftops using thick, reinforced braids of wool. Every pillar in the main hall was wrapped in intricate, seamless floral garlands, and the ceremonial altar was draped in a massive, sprawling tapestry of interlocking geometric motifs. It was warm, it was opulent, and it was entirely, unapologetically handmade. My lady, Xiaotsue sniffled, adjusting the heavy, gold-embroidered red veil over my head. For once, her tears were happy. You look like a proper bride. Even the capital could not boast a wedding this beautiful. The capital lacks structural integrity, Xiaotsue. I smiled, running my hands over the incredibly fine, silk-lined wool of my wedding dress. I had designed it myself, a perfect marriage of southern elegance and northern warmth. A heavy rhythmic knock echoed at the door of my private quarters. "The vanguard is ready, Madame Su," Lieutenant Zhao called out, sounding distinctly more relaxed now that he wasn't staring down an imperial envoy. I stepped out into the courtyard. Waiting for me at the end of the lantern-lit aisle was Huo Ting. For the first time since I had met him, the Iron Ghost was entirely devoid of armor. He was dressed in traditional, deep crimson wedding robes, the dark fabric tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. Without the heavy iron plates and the wolf fur cloak, he didn't look like a terrifying warlord. He looked impossibly regal, breathtakingly handsome, and completely focused on me. The ceremony was a blur of ancient traditions executed with military precision. We bowed to the heavens, we bowed to the earth, and we shared the nuptial cup of wine. The entire northern vanguard cheered so loudly it probably triggered an avalanche in the distant mountains. By the time the moon was high and the workers were happily feasting on roasted pork and wine, Huo Ting and I finally retreated to the quiet sanctuary of our newly joined private quarters. The room was warm, the brazier glowing softly against the crimson yarn decorations hanging from the ceiling. Huo Ting gently lifted the red veil from my face, his calloused hands surprisingly delicate. He looked down at me, his dark eyes tracing my features with an intense, quiet reverence that made my breath catch. "The hostile takeover is officially complete," I whispered, a nervous, happy smile pulling at my lips. "The Su Enterprise is legally yours, General." "I have no interest in the Enterprise, Suwan," he murmured, his hands sliding down to cup my waist, pulling me closer. "I only ever wanted the architect." "Oh really?" I teased, looping my arms loosely around his neck. "Because for the first month of our contract, you spent an awful lot of time auditing my inventory. I thought you were just a micromanager." A soft, genuine laugh rumbled in Huo Ting's chest, a sound so rare and beautiful it practically stopped my heart. "I have a confession regarding those audits," he admitted, his thumbs tracing slow, soothing circles against my waist. "I did not care about the stitch tension. I did not care about the daily output quotas." I feigned a gasp. "General, you lied on an official military inspection." "Routinely," he smiled, leaning his forehead against mine. "I audited your courtyard because it was the only tactical excuse I had to watch you work. To hear you command a room. To be near the only person in this frozen wasteland who wasn't afraid to yell at me over a broken door." My heart executed a flawless, seamless flutter. So, the Iron Ghost was just finding excuses to linger around my yarn? I whispered. "Every single day," he confessed, his voice dropping to a low, devastating rumble. "I am a man of strategy, Suwan. When I saw something that brought light and warmth to my territory, I calculated the necessary variables to keep it. I just didn't anticipate that the variable would completely rewrite my entire existence." I looked up at the terrifying, brilliant, fiercely protective commander who had threatened an empire just to ensure I could keep doing what I loved. I had spent my entire second life trying to build an empire out of thread, completely unaware that I was simultaneously stitching together the perfect partner. "Your strategy was highly optimized, Huo Ting," I smiled, leaning up to press my lips against his. "I know," he breathed against my mouth. "Now, Madame Su, I believe it is time we conclude the business negotiations for the evening." He swept me off my feet, carrying me toward the heavily draped canopy bed, entirely ready to initiate a completely different kind of seamless join. Epilogue. 3 years later. The harsh, howling winds of the northern frontier had not changed, but everything else in Heiha had. I stood at the massive, polished mahogany table in the center of the Vanguard's newly constructed military mercantile command center, looking down at a sprawling map of the continent. The small, ruined courtyard where I had carved a bamboo hook was a distant memory. The Su Enterprise now occupied an entire district of the city, operating a flawless, highly optimized production line that employed over 1,000 women. "The Western Pass will freeze in exactly 4 weeks, I murmured, dragging a charcoal pencil across the map, charting a complex logistical curve. I had spent the morning using principles of ordinary differential equations to model the optimal velocity of our supply carts against the dropping temperature gradients of the mountain passes. It was the only way to ensure our luxury goods reached the distant desert cities without weather delays. "Which is why my caravans must depart by tomorrow, Madame Su," a deep, rich voice replied from across the table. I looked up at Lord Chu, the lead ambassador of the Western trade fleet. He was a shrewd, brilliantly perceptive merchant who had traveled thousands of miles across the steppes specifically to secure exclusive distribution rights for my brand. Your calculations are flawless as always, Lord Chu smiled, adjusting the collar of his heavy, indigo-dyed cloak. He was already wearing one of our seamless winter beanies. But my buyers in the Western capitals are exceptionally demanding. They do not just want the standard winter gear. They want the aesthetic pieces. They want the new premium line. The Blithora collection, I clarified, tapping a beautifully carved wooden lockbox on the table. Exactly. Lord Chu nodded reverently. I unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on pale parchment, were the crown jewels of my enterprise. The Blithora line was the culmination of 3 years of relentless crochet innovation. It featured delicate, airy-ribbed halters made from spun desert silk, intricate granny square overlays that draped like fine jewelry, and cowls stitched with a tension so mathematically perfect they looked like woven gold. It was an aesthetic triumph, blending extreme structural integrity with soft, undeniable elegance. You shall have 500 units of the Blithora line, I agreed, sliding the lockbox across the table. At 50 taels apiece. In exchange, the Sioux Enterprise secures a 20% tariff reduction on all raw cotton imported through your western routes for the next fiscal year. Lord Chu chuckled, shaking his head in sheer respect. You negotiate like a warlord, Madam Sioux. It is a pleasure doing business with you. He signed the heavy parchment contract, stamped it with his wax seal, and took his leave to prepare the caravans. As the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, a familiar, terrifyingly handsome shadow detached itself from the corner of the room. Huo Ting walked toward me, his black iron armor practically absorbing the light. Even after 3 years of marriage, the Iron Ghost still possessed an aura that made the entire northern hemisphere hold its breath. But as he reached the table, the warlord melted away. He stepped up behind me, wrapping his massive, armored arms around my waist and resting his chin on the top of my head. 50 taels apiece? Huo Ting rumbled softly, his chest vibrating against my back. You are financially decimating the Western territories. I am providing them with elite structural integrity, I corrected, leaning back into his solid warmth. Besides, maintaining a 1,000-person workforce requires capital, and I have to ensure my husband's army remains the best-equipped force on the continent. Huo Ting turned his head, pressing a warm kiss to my temple. The imperial court had long since abandoned their attempts to control Heiha. After our marriage, the emperor had realized that threatening the Sioux Enterprise meant starving the imperial treasury of its massive tax revenue. And more importantly, it meant going to war with an untouchable, fiercely loyal northern army. We had completely rewritten the rules of the empire. I commanded the economy, and Huo Ting commanded the borders. The vanguard is perfectly equipped, Huo Ting murmured, his hands gently covering mine on the edge of the map. But the commander requires your undivided attention. The sun has set, Suwan. Your production quotas are met for the day. I turned in his arms, looking up into the dark, incredibly soft eyes of the man who had torn up a contract to build a life with me. Are you ordering me to step away from my ledgers, General? I asked, a wicked smile playing on my lips. I am initiating a mandatory, indefinite hold on all commercial activities, Huo Ting replied, lifting me effortlessly into his arms, entirely uncaring of his heavy iron plates. The only variable I care to analyze tonight is you. I laughed, looping my arms around his neck as he carried me out of the war room. The ledgers were balanced, the supply chain was moving, and my handmade empire was secure. But looking at Huo Ting, I knew the greatest thing I had ever built wasn't made of yarn at all. That's where this love story ends for now. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more romantic twists. Tell me in the comments what will you have done. Until the next story, keep craving romance.